Hi, I'm Connor Mead, and we're here today at the 2016 Canadian Science Policy Conference. And joining me today is Robert Gooding-Townsend, who's a master's student at the University of Waterloo. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So to get us started off, why don't you tell us a little bit about your work, your research, and your interests?
Yeah, so my research, I'm a master's student in mathematical biology at University of Waterloo. I'm modeling forest population dynamics and how they're changing over time, basically trying to see on a decades-long timescale, are global forests in danger of collapsing, and if one collapses, how will that put pressure on other forests? But since I'm in ecology, a lot of the ultimate goal of ecology is to influence policy. So that's sort of one reason I'm interested in coming here, seeing how policy gets made. But I'm here for a couple other reasons too. One is the purely pragmatic. I'm considering changing fields to something more like policy, so it makes sense to be here. But I'm also, the way science works in society is this huge central topic that determines how the future is made, and I want to be part of those conversations. That's why I joined Science Borealis. I'm a subject editor in Science and Society. And I have a background in science comedy to talk about these same issues, but from a more humorous lens.
So I find that fascinating. Can you tell me a bit more about science comedy? I've never heard those two words used in the same sentence before.
So science comedy, there's a whole range of ideas that fall under it. It's pretty loose definition. A lot of it involves cartoons. XKCD is the most popular one. But really it's making jokes about science and using those jokes to get people to think about these normally very serious concepts from another angle, and hopefully get some new ideas, get some new conversation that might not otherwise be happening. So my specific background is I did a competition that's the Bad Ad Hoc Hypotheses Festival. So it's making fun of evolutionary psychology largely, and I was presenting the idea that human intelligence evolved due to consumption of alcohol. Alcohol has calories that make our brains bigger, and we also just needed to dilute all of that to not be too stupid.
That story sounds just so.
Yes.
So what do you think are some of the most effective media through which we can use comedy to tell the story of science and drive scientific literacy?
I think one of the most effective mediums is just at conferences taking a bunch of people who are here to talk about science and to talk about these issues, but then having something like stand-up, having something like a person whose job it is to deliberately ask tough questions or to turn things into a joke so that people are thinking about the same thing in different ways. Often you can do that at a pub night afterwards. At specifically science conferences, it's quite popular to have PowerPoint karaoke, where you go through someone's presentation you've never seen before with a terrible effect. Yeah. And so all of these kinds of things are ways to get people to use their science brains in a different way.
Fantastic. So if you don't mind bragging a little bit, I know that you just won the Youth Science Award. So why don't you tell us a bit about what your work that led to that, what makes it unique and what makes it important?
Yeah, so I saw the website has this contest for youth science competitions, or youth science policy proposals, and I thought, well, they're having this, they're explicitly advertising it to youth, partly because I think they want some new risky ideas. Let's go with the sort of the most blatantly controversial idea I can think of on short notice, and that was using a lottery system in science grant awards. The idea is that in a lot of cases we're unable to distinguish who will perform, what research proposals will be successful and what will not be ahead of time, because if we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be called research. And so in light of our total ignorance, we should, in some cases, we should stop trying to guess who it will be that succeeds and just find a bunch of things, see what works, and then work from there.
That is absolutely fascinating. Yeah, that's incredible. So, do you think, as a suggestion, do you think that it's a serious suggestion, or is it more of a tongue-in-cheek way to bring attention to the uncertainty of making choices in funding and attention to different exploratory research topics?
I think it's both. I think that as a serious suggestion, if anyone were to implement it, they would have to be very, very careful about it and only do it in limited circumstances. For when you need researcher buy-in, you can't completely overhaul a system and say, we won't fund you the way we always have been doing. We're going to do it randomly, haha, pick from this hat. Like, that would incite total rebellion and would not get a productive research community. But there are cases where, especially where payout rates are already low and where the process feels very murky and opaque, where researchers already have the sense that the process is more or less arbitrary and that there's a lot of bias in it, and really it could be better if we replaced it with something like this. You can combine it with an internal review of existing processes. For example, as I was going through this, I was going through the NSERC external review. And by category, they're looking at of the grants we funded versus the proposals we did not fund, which ones had more publications and more citations of those publications. And in most categories, the system works as expected. The ones that we fund did better. But in biomedical research, it is statistically significant that the ones they did not fund perform much better. So it's like in this specific funding area, it seems like it would literally be better if you pick randomly from the proposals. And this proposal is partly just a way of pointing out there is that flaw in the existing system. In this case, it would be better if we picked something random. Let's either do that or fix the existing system such that it is no longer the case.
Well, at a bare minimum, it would provide a fascinating experiment to set a baseline of what random allocation of funding would deliver. Do you think there are any ethical issues of maybe not telling researchers that their funding has been delivered as a result of a random process as opposed to in order to have a valid experiment there?
Yeah, I think that you don't want to do this kind of thing where it's deceptive and you're not telling people anything about the mechanism that their funding was selected. But that point you brought up is a very good one of having this controlled experiment of randomized versus the existing grant process. There is very little research. There's very little research into the process of how research funding works. There are no experiments. The observational studies have tons of confounders and tend to have fairly small sample size. But even within those constraints, not very many observational studies have even been done. It's this sort of small body of expert judgment that's really all we're relying on, and that's unfortunate in this case because, from the psychology of expertise, we know expertise is unreliable in cases where there's little feedback on short time scales. It takes a very long time to hear any feedback, and the situation is always changing, and those factors are certainly the case in science funding. You have multi-year timescales, and the landscape keeps changing every 6 months in something like biology.
Yeah. Well, another very interesting result of random allocation of funding would be the ability to disentangle the selection versus treatment effects of funding in various types of research support.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. I haven't even brought that into my proposal myself, but this is why we talk to other people, so thank you for that.
Fantastic. So my last question before we wrap up, where can our viewers at home go to learn more about your proposal, more about your work, maybe check out your tight 5 minutes of scientific stand-up comedy?
Yeah, okay. So the proposal that I presented is really adapted from this paper it's an open source, open access paper by Ferric Fang and Arturo Casadeval called Towards a Modified Funding Lottery. And they're specifically looking in an American context with the National Institutes of Health, which a lot of researchers feel this frustration towards. And that's why they were proposing it in that context. So that's certainly a key resource for anyone interested in sort of serious proposals for a funding lottery. As for where you can find my science comedy, the acronym is BAHFest, B-A-H-F, and that's with Zach Wienersmith, who's the creator of SMBC Comics.
Cool.
So.
Right on. Excellent. Well, Robert, thank you so much for joining me. Joining us for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope you have a great CSPC 2016.
Thank you, Connor, for having me.
Awesome.